So the KBO wants to hold a future season opener in the U.S. At a recent meeting between the KBO Commissioner and MLB's Senior Vice President for International Affairs, a number of future events involving the two leagues were discussed. Among them, next year's WBC and a KBO MLB All-Star Series taking place in Korea after the end of the Korean Series and World Series. But the idea that's got everyone's attention is the KBO season opener on American soil, something most of us had never even considered before. But there are a lot of questions surrounding this proposal, the biggest one being, can it work? Is there enough interest to get a stadium full of fans in a single city for a regular season game? How big of a stadium would it be? And some have naturally asked, why KBO and not NPB? First of all, let's look at why they want to do this. Well, as you know, KBO games were televised nationally in the U.S. in 2020 when American sports were shut down. Most sports fans in the U.S. had zero knowledge of the KBO, but were just glad to have live sports to watch. Korean teams gained a large number of new fans in the U.S. for the first time, and while most of those fans abandoned the KBO when MLB and other major professional sports returned, some stayed fans to this day. This was a great opportunity that the KBO was able to take advantage of. The next step, naturally, would have been to schedule a regular season game in the U.S. as soon as possible, but with all the travel restrictions, it just couldn't be done. Now that things are getting back to normal, they have the chance to take that next step. But is it already too late? It probably won't happen next year because it would conflict with the WBC schedule, so the earliest it could happen would be 2024. The memory of televised KBO games in the U.S. is already fading, and it would be 4 years later. But it could still work. KBO teams travel to the U.S. every spring to train for the upcoming season, since they lack good warm weather facilities in Korea. So the teams are already in the country. They just have to stay a little longer, find a suitable ballpark, and promote the event. And another thing the KBO Commissioner wants to do is have KBO teams actively participate in an MLB spring training. This means you could see the Lotte Giants versus the San Francisco Giants in a Cactus League game. The level of play wouldn't be an issue in spring training because the major league teams would have a mix of major and minor league players, and they would just be practice games anyway. In past years when the WBC was taking place, national teams participated in spring training there. This would not only be good training for the KBO players, it would also be a good way to make their brand known to the spring training crowd. Thousands of fans show up for spring training games, and while they wouldn't be there to watch the KBO team, they would become familiar with the teams and some of the players. It could make some fans curious about the KBO League and be interested in attending the season opener. I think the best approach would be for them to participate in MLB spring training for a few years before attempting to hold a season opener in the U.S. Sure, it would be nice to capitalize on the exposure they got from the 2020 season, but I think the opportunity is already passed. People have short memories. I don't think that one summer of televised broadcast will be enough to sell out a stadium 4 years later, but a continuous presence every spring just might do it. Another question here is where to hold the event. My first thought was to hold it in an area where a lot of Koreans live, or they might look at what cities had the highest ratings for KBO games during the 2020 season. I don't have that information, but I'm sure the KBO does. I think having the season opener in Arizona would be a good option. They'd be able to promote themselves during spring training, so the same fans who show up to Cactus League games also attend the KBO game. This would occur after the major league teams return to their home cities, and the KBO opener would be the finale at the spring training locations. As for stadium capacity, I would rule out any major league ballparks. They're just not going to attract a crowd to fill a ballpark that size. KBO stadiums seat around 20,000, and that's what they'd be hoping for, 10,000 at a minimum. At the spring training fields in Arizona, they could get 10 to 15,000. Maybe not as big as they're hoping for, but the exposure they get from holding a successful season opener would be worth it. Now, if this could work for the KBO, does that mean it could work for NPB too? It's fun to imagine an iconic matchup like Yomiuri Giants versus Hanshin Tigers in a major league ballpark, or 20-year-old Roki Sasaki with his 100-mile-an-hour fastball leading his Chiba Lotte Marines on the field against the Rakuten Eagles, led by Masahiro Tanaka, a name major league fans have known for years. But it's probably not going to happen. First of all, NPB teams do their spring training in Japan. No shortage of warm weather facilities there. The route I suggested for the KBO to participate in MLB spring training year after year won't look so desirable to NPB clubs who don't want to disrupt their spring routines. And playing in a stadium of 10 to 15,000 for a regular season opener they might not be comfortable with. NPB teams average around 30,000 per game. For the Giants and Tigers, over 40,000. Why travel halfway around the world to play in front of a crowd a third of the size you're used to? If NPB is going to hold a regular season opener in the U.S., they'll be hoping for something bigger. If they really wanted this to happen, they would make NPB games more accessible on the internet, build up an audience, and eventually land it on TV in the U.S. Then think about having a season opener in a major league park with over 30,000 fans. But as you know, they haven't even completed the first step. They're way behind when it comes to making their product available to overseas fans. They just don't seem too interested in marketing the league outside of Japan. And there's nothing wrong with that. NPB is a Japanese league with Japanese teams and mostly Japanese players. They don't have any obligation to any other markets, though I do wish they would come up with a better streaming service. There's a lot of interest in NPB overseas, and not everyone can make the trip to Japan to see a game in person. And they could make money off of it, so I don't see why they haven't done it already. The idea of playing NPB games in the US was suggested by a previous NPB commissioner about a dozen years ago, but it was at the same time that he floated the idea of an Asian Super League, expansion to 16 teams, and a World Championship between the Japan Series and World Series champions. Since absolutely no steps have been taken toward any of those ideas coming true, I would assume he wasn't very serious about it. So I'd say the KBO should go ahead and do it, but not right away. Try to build up an audience gradually. If they want to do it, they can make it happen. 2 years ago, they were able to get KBO games on national TV in the US because they had started their season, but NPB was unable to. Now they can hold a season opener in the US because NPB is unwilling to. Anyway, that's what I think. Let me know what you think down in the comments. That's all for this one, and until next time, this is Baseball International. See ya.